Cleopatra Philopator was probably among the best-known pharaohs of Egypt. But she was not Egyptian, she was Greek, a member of the Ptolemaic dynasty that ruled the kingdom since Alexander the Great's death. She ruled Egypt with her son Caesarion, son of Julius Caesar, and when they died, that was the end of pharaohs. But this is not why Cleopatra is so famous to this day. It was her legendary beauty and her ability to persuade men that survived the millennia. However, no contemporary sources mention her out-of-the-ordinary beauty, and later sources describe her as nothing spectacular. So, was she truly beautiful, or was she just a cunning leader? Hello, and welcome to 7 Facts. Cleopatra's romantic relationships have been mentioned in the history books over and over again. After all, she was the concubine of the powerful general Julius Caesar, so this isn't that surprising. But when Caesar was murdered, she found another powerful lover, Mark Antony, the friend and possible successor of Julius Caesar. That didn't happen, so together they fought against Rome until their deaths. The story of Cleopatra's life and suicide was the source of countless books, plays, and movies. Over the centuries, the image of Cleopatra as an unequaled beauty queen started to emerge. In all of the movies ever made about her, Cleopatra was always portrayed by the most beautiful actresses. But the statues, coins, and portraits of antiquity tell a different story and seem to prove that Cleopatra's great beauty is nothing more than a romantic idea. Most descriptions of Cleopatra came after she died. Those descriptions are mostly symbolic and idealized. The actual portraits that survived the 2000 years that had passed since then tell a different story. They are actually the only clues as to how she actually looked like. There are no physical descriptions of her from when she was actually alive. The closest we can get to an eyewitness is through the Greek biographer Plutarch, who knew the nephew of one of Cleopatra's courtiers. He wrote that Cleopatra's beauty wasn't exceptional, but her ability to converse and persuade, her presence, her charm, all had something stimulating about it. The problem with this description is that it came about a century after Cleopatra's death. Whatever the case, there is one thing you need to remember. Beauty standards change. They change throughout time and they change from culture to culture. It's not a fixed thing. So it's more than likely that, whatever she looked like, Cleopatra's beauty doesn't correspond to our standards today. For instance, most female mummies of the Ptolemaic dynasty were short, around 1.5 meters, while today tall women are considered to be more attractive. From the coins and busts we can clearly see the rings of Venus, wrinkles on the neck caused by excess fat. From the same coins, we can also observe a generously large nose and not exactly small ears, but these features were common in Greek populations. The image of the seducing pharaoh was actually born in Rome. Just decades after her death, her name was already being used by merchants to sell cosmetics. In the Middle Ages, chroniclers accused her of witchcraft. She must have used magic potions to seduce Mark Antony. Shakespeare and many other writers treated her with a more royal dignity, but the image of the unparalleled beauty of Cleopatra that charmed all men persisted and became common knowledge. So, did she seduce Caesar? What do we actually know? Well, at the time she met Julius Caesar, she was fearing for her life, so she probably saw in Caesar a potential protector. She was 20 years old, in an unconsummated marriage with her brother. Don't worry, that wasn't a scandalous thing in most royal dynasties. Caesar was 52 at the time, he was married and had many concubines as lovers. So, in reality, we don't really know who seduced who. Before we continue, I'd like to ask you one thing. This channel has no sponsors, so if you enjoy the content I make, please consider supporting these videos by becoming a patron. You can check out my Patreon page by clicking here, or find the link in the description. Okay, now we can move on to the next fact. Cleopatra VII was born in the Ptolemaic dynasty in Alexandria in the year 69 BC. The Ptolemies were pretty much puppet rulers of Egypt, as their position and power depended solely on Rome's goodwill. But they were a ceremonial bunch that really liked to show off. As a result, Cleopatra had been given the best education possible, and even at a young age she was already cunning and royal. Her diplomatic skills were excellent. She inherited the throne at age 17 and was basically caught between a disillusioned Egyptian population and a horde of scheming counselors. And over the Mediterranean, Rome was ever present and increasingly more powerful. In 48 BC, when Caesar came to Egypt, Cleopatra was in exile. Her brother seized exclusive power over the kingdom. Upon allegedly hearing that Caesar was inclined to having affairs with royal women, she came to Alexandria to see him personally. Plutarch wrote that she was bound inside a bed sack to be smuggled into the palace to meet Caesar, while others wrote that she met him dressed in an attractive manner. At this point, her actual life was in danger, so can you blame her for seeking help in such manners? In any case, Caesar was indeed charmed by her, but no records mention that he was charmed by her beauty. Nor does it say anywhere that he became so enamored with her that he couldn't refuse any of her wishes. Of course, we know that she became Caesar's lover and he even took her to Rome, but his reasons were more likely political and petty. Caesar supported her claim to the throne because he probably thought that she would be easier to control than a male ruler or a Roman governor. Caesar indeed loved women, but he wasn't controlled by them. He had many lovers, including the wives of senators and kings. During the 2 years Cleopatra had spent in Rome, Caesar didn't give her any official status. She was just an exotic courtier. But she did give him something his wife never did: a son. It was rumored that Caesar talked about a law that would have permitted him to marry any woman or women. If this law would have come to pass, Cleopatra could have been an empress and her son the successor of Caesar. But this never happened. Caesar was assassinated in 44 BC. In his will, he left all of his inheritance and his family name to Octavian, his grandnephew, who would later become Caesar Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. While this disappointed greatly Cleopatra, it must be mentioned that Roman laws forbid foreigners to inherit any properties or titles from a Roman citizen. Cleopatra had no alternative than to go back to Alexandria with her son. 3 years later, Cleopatra became the lover of another powerful Roman, Mark Antony. Many historians wrote that she seduced him because she was convinced that he was the most likely future ruler of Rome. The chroniclers of Octavian wrote in mockery that Mark Antony would break any laws of men and gods to satisfy every single need of the pharaoh. So what did happen? When she became involved with Mark Antony in 41 BC, she was 29 years old. She was summoned to Tarsus, in modern-day Turkey, to clear up the misconception that she had supported a rival faction during the civil war, in which Caesar's murderers were defeated. Remember I said that the Ptolemies liked ceremonies and were good at it? Well, when Cleopatra arrived to Tarsus, she made sure she had a spectacular entry. She arrived on a bark with a golden stern, with sails of purple and oars of silver, and the dip of her oars was rhythmed to the sound of flutes blending with music. She herself was laying under a gold-embroidered canopy. Boys dressed as cupids stood at her side, gently waving fans to refresh her. Her maidens, every one beautiful, directed the boat. Both banks of the stream were sweet with the perfumes burning on the vessel. This was a grand appearance, and it worked. Mark Antony and Cleopatra became lovers, and soon she would be pregnant again. She invited him to Egypt, and he went, and stayed, for an entire year. Mark Antony's presence in Alexandria consolidated Cleopatra's power, so she probably did everything she could to keep him there. But eventually, Mark Antony left to Rome. She gave birth to 2 twins, but back in Rome, Mark Antony married Octavian's sister, Octavia. This marriage was a heavy blow to Cleopatra, but it didn't last. 4 years later, he came back to Alexandria to be with her. So is this proof of her irresistible power of seduction? Unlikely. Aged over 30, she is depicted as an austere and severe ruler. No, it probably wasn't love that brought Mark Antony back to Egypt. His relationship with Octavian was hitting an all-time low, so his decision to divorce his wife and leave Rome was probably based on the fact that he could gather support in Egypt and gain access to their fleet, the most powerful in the Mediterranean. He recognized his children with Cleopatra, married her, and distributed lands held by Rome and Parthia amongst Cleopatra's children, and granted them many titles. In Rome, this was viewed as a hostile move, through which Mark Antony was ensuring his rule through his children. His acts were propagandistically blamed on Cleopatra and her wild ambitions. Ultimately, the donations caused a fatal breach in Antony's relations with Rome and were amongst the causes of the final war of the Roman Republic. The Roman Senate declared war on Cleopatra, not Mark Antony. As long as Mark Antony was still a reputed aristocrat in Rome, Octavian had to blame Cleopatra and her power of seduction for this whole mess. But Antony chose his side and betrayed Rome. He would fight on Cleopatra's side. After the decisive victory for Octavian at the Battle of Actium, Cleopatra and Antony withdrew to Alexandria, where Octavian besieged the city. It was there that both Antony and Cleopatra committed suicide. Following the end of the war, Octavian brought peace to the Roman state that had been plagued by a century of civil wars. Octavian became the most powerful man in the Roman world, and the Senate bestowed upon him the title of Augustus. He would be the first Roman emperor and would transform the oligarchic republic into the autocratic Roman Empire. The last Republican civil war would mark the beginning of the Pax Romana. Cleopatra and Mark Antony were allowed to be buried together in a properly manner, although we don't know where. Over the centuries, the image of Cleopatra as a seductive, irresistible and cunning woman endured and was exaggerated. She became a woman of unparalleled beauty, but her real power was in diplomacy and intelligence. I hope this video was interesting enough to have inspired you to look into it further on your own. If you liked it, leave a like and subscribe. You can leave your comments downstairs, and you can also check out my Patreon page if you want to support me. The link is in the description. I hope to see you next time. Bye.